another episode of the Mental Health Movement podcast, Voice for the Voiceless. I am your host, Chris. And, we start off June, it being Men's Health Awareness Month. We talk about the suicide statistics all the time with other guests that I've had on, but, when you read them, it really puts everything into perspective. This being the first podcast of June, it being with a fellow man definitely makes it that much more meaningful because we all need to hear just how real these statistics are. So about 525,000 men take their life every year. That's 10,096 per week, 1,442 per day, 60 men per hour. That's one man every 60 seconds from suicide. Men are three times as many men will die by suicide. We're wrongly taught that emotion is weak and that, we should just rub dirt in it and we should man up. And, I'm here to tell you that there is absolutely no shame in sharing how you feel about what's going on in your life and speaking out to people that you trust, whether that's therapy, whether that's a best friend. Reach out if you need help. And there are so many resources for us in 2025. So please, I encourage all of you guys to talk to somebody and just remember that it's okay to not be okay. With that being said, today's guest is a psychedelic integration therapist, and he is also a mental health advocate. Please help me welcome Julian Bermudez. Julian, how you doing, man?
Hey Chris, thanks for introducing me. I'm very happy to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that we were able to book this. And like I said before we started recording, kind of dug into your work a little bit and what you bring to the table. So I'm genuinely excited for this conversation. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
So before we get into your story, can you share with us what does men's mental health mean to you?
Well, you identified some very important factors right off the bat, which gives us a lot to talk about. A lot of the times, and it's not just for men, but it's especially for men, I do find this with a lot of women that I work with as well, is we're taught that emotions in particular are bad. We learn that at a very early age. And this in itself is an adaptation to trauma. So it's a secondary trauma. The first thing is that our connections, our attachments, especially early in our life, the thing that is most important to us, the thing that we can't survive without because humans are, as far as I can see, the most immature, undeveloped, dependent species on this planet for the longest amount of time. It takes a human 3, 4 years to learn how to run, to where a horse learns how to run on its first day of life. So we can't survive without our attachments. But what ends up happening is due to the stresses of everyday life, our attachments, the thing that we're most dependent on, are often threatened by our authenticity, especially our emotions, our boundaries, our expression. So we learn to suppress those very early in life. This is one of the biggest traumas as we disconnect from ourselves. So in terms of mental health, what I really help men do, and a lot of people in general, almost everybody that I work with, is to reconnect with yourself, to tap back into your emotions, to tap back into your body, and to learn how to process and express and soothe this pain that we carry, and to learn how to relate and connect with your emotions and express them in healthy, constructive ways.
Right. Yeah, I think when it comes to just mental health in general, you said it best when it comes to just being able to set those boundaries for ourselves. I feel like is one of the most challenging things that just as human beings aren't taught what boundaries are, aren't taught what self-care is, and like you said, that detachment that we have from our inner self. So I think it's definitely important to not only put ourselves first in a lot of instances, but also to train ourselves to set those boundaries, to acknowledge that we're struggling, acknowledge that we have the issues that we're going through. Because I feel the hardest part, just as a human being, is being honest with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The first step in healing that I often tell people is taking an honest and truthful inventory of all the pains, all the constrictions, all the ways that we've been limited or that we limit ourselves, and seeing those truthfully, not as we want to be, not as we wish things were, but as they are right now. Carl Rogers, the famous psychologist from the mid 20th century, famously said that the interesting paradox is that only when I accept myself exactly as I am do I have the capacity to change. So, building awareness, learning how to recognize and identify these dynamics is the first step if we're going to accept them and then figure out why are they here? What's the teaching? What can I learn from this?
Right. And you know, it's almost the same as addiction, right? It's first step is admitting we have a problem, right? And
Yeah,
first step of healing our trauma is admitting that we're not okay. And
yeah,
you know, like I said, it's hard to have that honest conversation with ourselves and admitting that we're not okay.
yeah.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about your journey here. Where does the journey start for you, and what made you want to focus on the psychedelic integration career?
Yeah, well, I'll give you my life in a nutshell if you want it.
However you want to share it, my friend.
Sure. Well, I was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1987. My dad was 19. He's Mexican, Puerto Rican. His parents immigrated here. And my mom was 21 and she's German. Her mother immigrated here after the Second World War. So I was growing up with parents that were relatively young, and we were growing up in very complex times with everything that was happening socially in Detroit, Michigan at the time. This also played into the racial segregations in the area, and I came from two very different races.
Right.
So my mom always lived in very white neighborhoods that were very low socioeconomic statuses, like trailer parks or low income housing. And my dad, he would live in, Southwest Detroit, Mexican town, or we moved to the west side of Detroit at one point. And he was working class, so he was able to establish at least some basic resources to survive, which just fueled the fire even more. So as I was growing up, my parents were never together, and they just bounced me back and forth. They absolutely hated each other, and still to this day, as far as I know, never. I think they've talked probably 5 times in my entire life. So as I did what children do, and I modeled my parents, I would model my dad, and my mom would hate me for it. And then I'd model my mom, and my dad would hate me. And moreover, I think there was a part of themselves that also hated themselves as well because they represented all the intergenerational patterns of trauma. So I always found myself being this mirror of each of the truth of what people are carrying around. And this was very, very painful because Carl Jung said that people will do anything they can to avoid facing themselves. So as I was mirroring that as growing up, I was hated for it. And this left me with a fundamental belief about myself, which was I was defective. There was something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of love. Or, in other words, I'm not safe. And for the first 23 to 25 years of my life, I wasn't safe. I was just really trying to figure out how to survive. And I was carrying around so much pain that I didn't know what to do with it. I was suicidally depressed, and given the patterns of where I had come up with all of these complexities in the area, I was most likely either going to end up dead or in prison, or both. So when I was 23, I had this really interesting experience and it really jostled me. And I decided I was going to change everything in my life. And this was, a cycle that would come around where I would constantly just reinvent my entire life. And it was incredible to have that kind of power and control in my life. But when you don't know what healthy relationships look like, when when you grow up, when I grow up, for instance, with my most important relationships looking like abuse, um, and on the best days, just judgment, criticism, evaluation, negligence. That's what relationships, that's what connection, that's what compassion looks like. So unconsciously later in life, I'm still seeking these things. So when I was 23, I started changing everything in my life and I went back to school. And when I was 25, I went to university to study addictions psychology, clinical psychology, with the idea of figuring out how to transform this pain that I was carrying around and ideally to help other people transform it as well. I wasn't exactly very happy with the lessons that I was getting in the university. I really wanted to understand why are humans the way that we are? And for the most part, the university was just saying, well, it's genetic or it's choice or it's a disease. And I didn't like that. That was very removed from my real life experiences. So I started finding teachers on my own through self-study. And through that, I found this field of therapy that I'm now in. And what I ended up doing is over the course of about 10 years was studying all sorts of different therapy techniques with a whole range of teachers and schools of therapy, and then kind of boiling it all down into my own approach of what works for me. And the more and more I was able to transform my own pain to cultivate agency, autonomy, choice making in my own life, and the ability to take responsibility for my own emotions, for my own pain, for my own life, the more I was able to liberate myself from those old patterns and to create new things. The more I did that, the more people came to see me to figure out how to do the exact same thing. And that's how I end up here talking to you today.
I just want to start off, just at the beginning of your story. I literally saw myself in like my story identifies with yours, just almost line for line, minus the profession part. Um, I grew up with divorced parents. They hated each other too, and it's interesting that we see that cycle. And abuse was a very new word for me, come like when I started doing therapy myself. And it's so strange saying that word out loud now because it's like, yeah, that did happen to me. I did witness that. I did experience that. And transforming that into what you have now, I think is a testament to just how strong the human mind can be when it's pushed enough and wants to just completely change. And I admire so much about you, the fact that you reinvent yourself constantly. And one of the most important parts I want to pull out there is when you brought up school. You didn't like the definition or the reasonings they were giving you on certain circumstances, and you wanted to hear the human version of it, not what's coming out of a textbook, not what the definition of trauma or addiction or whatever it is, but you wanted to understand from a human perspective why things are the way that they are. So I absolutely admire the fact that you mentioned that because I feel it's really important for people to hear that sometimes going to school doesn't matter if it's 10 years, doesn't matter if it's 4 years. Sometimes life experience can give you a lot more than going to school. And I think that conversation definitely is important to have.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there, Chris. And again, here's the mirror. So when you say that you respect or admire what I'm saying here, you're seeing that as a part of yourself as well. So it's really important. This can be really challenging in this sphere is not to just identify the things that are going wrong or that are causing us pain or harm, but also to identify the things that are going right and then to find a place to celebrate those things and to honor and cherish those things. A lot of the times when we grow up in environments like we did, we don't know what it looks like to be cherished, to be respected, honored, and valued. So these are things that we really need to learn how to cultivate ourselves. So when you're saying that you see a lot of me inside of you and you're saying that you respect me, what I'll encourage you to try and do, maybe you already do this, is to try and see that part that you respect of yourself as well. And also just give it a little smile every once in a while and say,
Yeah,
ah, yeah, that's me too.
absolutely, man. And I feel that, affirmations are something that are I'm really big on, constantly finding something that made you happy during the day. Celebrate one win a day. It doesn't matter if you woke up, if you took a shower, a win is a win. Small step is still a step. And I feel that when you can look yourself in the mirror and say, life is okay right now. I got a roof over my head. I got a nice warm shower. You're fortunate enough to be breathing. And the title of the podcast is Voice for the Voiceless because, we speak for those who either are no longer with us or are struggling to find their voice. And I'm very confident on the fact that having these conversations and being able to encourage each other to celebrate our wins, I think it's incredible that just to hear from a fellow guy that, look at yourself in the mirror too, man. You're doing great. And I really appreciate that, man. I genuinely do because I feel those kind of conversations don't happen nearly enough.
Yeah. Voice for the voiceless, right? Who are the people who don't have voices? Usually people who are isolated, usually people who have no resources, people who are all alone. So it's really important to, yeah, put these messages out there and just to share that we don't have to do it alone. We don't have to go through these situations and we don't have to carry this pain alone. And a lot of the times we develop the belief, and this usually comes from very early in life, that I have to be strong, I have to be independent, I have to figure it all out on my own. And so, yeah, it's really important for us to have these conversations and to reach out hands and connect with people who are maybe all alone with their pain right now or don't have anywhere else to turn and might have a belief, a story that they tell that it's very bad to feel these things. Because again, early in life, if we would have expressed our emotions, if we had expressed our anger, our fear, our sadness, our pain, a lot of the times that would have made things more difficult, more dangerous, more challenging for us. So a lot of the times just facing the pain, just seeing it, just acknowledging that it's there is accompanied with some sort of threat response, some sort of defense that is there to take us away from it. So
Right.
again, taking that inventory, coming and facing that pain is the first step in healing, and we don't have to do it alone.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the psychedelics. How do psychedelics play a role in addressing mental health challenges such as anxiety, depression, or trauma?
Sure. So I would define psychedelic, the actual definition, not my definition. The actual definition of psychedelic is broken into two parts. You have psyche and delic. Psyche is what we hear in psychology. It's all of the immaterial aspects of who we are as individuals or as humans. It's our minds, it's our emotions, it's all of the energetic properties that we have with us. It's our spirituality. It's oftentimes referred to as our soul, this immaterial aspect of who we are. And then delic is emerging or manifesting. So when you put those two together, what ends up happening is you have a deep connection to yourself. And that is the type of therapy that I try to do is I try to bring people back to themselves, bring them back to this present moment to reconnect with their feelings, their intuition, and all the wisdom that is inside of them. This is so profoundly powerful for something like trauma, anxiety, or addictions, which all of those are under the umbrella of trauma itself. The main trauma that we experience is that we're going through pain. Trauma is when bad things happen that shouldn't happen. So our parents don't like us, our parents are bouncing us around, our parents are abusive, our parents are incarcerated, our parents are not present, so on and so forth. Um, or it could also be good things that are supposed to happen that don't happen. So our parents are very loving and they're present, but they're too stressed with work. So they're not emotionally present with us. They're not able to attune to our emotional needs when we're dependent on them. They're maybe really caring for us and they want to show up as best as they can. So they consult medical or expert advice that tells them when your baby cries, don't hold them. Let them learn how to self-soothe. They need to learn how to be independent. Or perhaps the parents have to go back to work a week after you're born. So there's a lot of things that could happen, whether it's bad things that shouldn't happen or good things that don't happen. But that's not enough to make something traumatic. What
Right.
makes it traumatic is what happens inside us as a result of what happens to us. The main trauma, the biggest trauma is that the thing that happens inside of us is we disconnect from ourselves. We learn very early that having emotions, having feelings, having these intuitions, these biological programmings inside of us that are designed to facilitate connection, that are designed to express boundaries and communicate needs. These are dangerous. And if I tap into these, if I express these, if I feel these, it's going to result in a disconnection. It's going to make me lose my relationships with my caregivers. So I disconnect from myself. The way that we end up doing that is we need distractions very commonly. We need things to take us away from ourselves. And this is what an addiction becomes, any behavior that gives us short-term relief but has long-term consequences. So there's a craving and an inability to give it up despite the fact that it hurts us. What it does for us is it takes us away from the pain, takes us away from the feelings, it takes us away from the present moment. So, what we try to do is to reconnect with ourselves, to build a relationship with those feelings, with the pain, with the emotion, and to try to meet the needs that we had in healthy, constructive ways. And there are lots of ways to get there.
I think it's very there's a lot there. Um, so okay, how does like a first session with a client usually go? Like how do you start the process of bringing your client back to I
Mhm.
guess finding their selves?
Yeah. My method is inquiry. So, I operate under the belief that the wisdom, the ability to heal, the innate internal ability that is apparent all throughout nature. If a tree loses a limb, it scars over, it heals. If an animal gets wounded, it goes into a den and it heals and it takes care of itself. The wisdom, the knowledge of how to heal is apparent all throughout nature. The knowledge of how to become whole, to become exactly who you are, is also apparent. So I operate under the belief that everybody that I work with, everybody that I see, has that knowledge inside of them, has that wisdom. And my method of bringing them back to that is through inquiry. So I ask lots of questions and I try to figure out what are the things that are disconnecting them. Where did this come from in their life? Where did they learn this? And what were the unmet needs that happened that were present when they learned this adaptation of disconnection? And if we can do that, I help them to see all the ways where this pain from the past that they're adapting to keeps showing up here in the present. How this pain and the adaptation that they have is continuing to take them away from themselves. And what we often find here is that these adaptations that we have, whether it's an addiction or a repression of your emotions or a sacrificing of yourself to please and maintain your relationships with others, we tend to have a very harsh view and a harsh relationship with it. And we're very harsh, critical, judgmental, evaluatory, and punitive to ourselves. So, what I try to help people do is see when that is present, to recognize and identify that, and then to build a relationship with it. So, when somebody comes in, usually the first few minutes is us just kind of talking about how this is going to work and going through basic consent things like me saying, I'm just asking questions. I don't have the answers to it. I'll figure it out with you. If you don't have the answers, that's okay. And if I tap into something, because I go straight for the core of this. I'm not going to do what most therapists will do and spend weeks, months, years just kind of going around in circles with you to where we get familiar enough for me to ask difficult questions. I'm going straight for the core. And I always offer people to set boundaries and say, if I'm not ready to talk about it, just say I'm not ready to talk about it, and we'll try a different approach. That rarely happens, but it's just to let them know that they can exert that. And if they don't say that, then I'll just trust that we're here for a reason and we can go into it. And so I start asking questions, just trying to bring people to understand how the pain from the past keeps showing up here in the present. That's the first thing.
So essentially, when it comes to the negative self-talk, I'm assuming that means accountability. You're talking to yourself like this, and we got to move past this and acknowledging that it's happened. And like you said, not going around in that same circle for months and years. I like that you mentioned that because I had a recent conversation with somebody about just therapy in general, and he was very skeptic of therapy because of that reason. He said, I had an experience where I was with somebody for like 2 years and we didn't make any progress. So I'm like, well, were you actually trying? Like, because obviously, as you know, not everybody that goes to therapy of any sort puts in the effort. And
Yeah,
he's like, yeah, I took the steps they instructed me to, but it just never, uh, nothing ever changed. I guess it kind of felt like it was the same session every single time we got together. So
sure.
I think accountability on both ends is really great because I love that you said that you're asking questions, and if you don't have the answers to, we're going to figure it out together. And I think that's something that every therapist should do, just for the simple fact that not enough people are held accountable on both ends, whether it's a therapist or whether it's the client. It's like, the therapists that lean on pharmaceuticals to cure their clients, which, I have my own thoughts on that I won't share here. um, but I feel that therapy it kind of still has that black cloud over it. It makes a lot of people skeptical because of that reason that you said, because of
Of course.
those therapists that don't put in the full effort of trying to help their clients.
Or they're putting in as much effort as they've been trained to.
Right.
I've worked with these therapists myself. I've had these therapists myself where, they're doing the best they can. They're trying the best that they can. When I was in graduate school studying therapy, almost, I won't say every class, but a lot of the classes that I had, at some point, usually in the beginning, the instructor would say, your main objective is to get the client to come back. That
Ooh,
is the most important thing. And they're saying this from really good intentions, from the sense
right.
that you can't help somebody if they don't come and talk to you. But there's a lot more intentions behind this too, such as we're strapped to the teeth with debt by the time we come out of school. So we've got to fill our calendars. That's the only way that we make money. These are a lot of things that get in the way of doing this type of therapy. When we're talking about accountability, responsibility, and this negative harshness, this self-talk that we have, we want to be very careful about the stories that we tell and the way we treat ourselves too. Because, yeah, I mean, we have limited resources. Not everybody's an expert in therapy. And if somebody's coming to see me, they're coming to me because I know how to do the therapy and they don't. So I can't expect them to be the ones to lead this. The accountability and responsibility piece is really, really important. But we also want to be very kind and gentle to ourselves. We want to see why these patterns are here and what purpose they serve. And it's not so much a matter of getting rid of them or fighting them or struggling with them, but more about learning why they're here. And yeah, that's something that you can do with all of these therapists, or when you're doing it with yourself or when you're working with somebody like me. That's the
Right.
goal, is to try and figure out why these patterns are here.
What are the most common mental health issues you see in individuals seeking psychedelic integration therapy? I know we kind of talked about anxiety, depression, trauma. Is there any diagnosis like that specific that would go to you, like maybe borderline personality or schizophrenia or anything like that? Have you seen any of those be common?
I won't say common, but yeah, they do come through, absolutely. And, my personal stance on this is all of these mental health issues or symptoms or conditions, whatever we want to call it, these almost every single time are born out of trauma. Anxiety is born out of trauma. We have these various emotional circuits that are built into us that are priming us for survival. um, what they do very early on is they facilitate a connection with our parents, for instance, because again, we're dependent for the longest amount of time. So when the baby's crying and constantly needy, there has to be some kind of programming that keeps the parents from throwing the baby out the window. So there's these emotional programmings, and for the child, if your needs aren't getting met, one of them goes off. It's called the panic and grief emotional
Mhm.
circuit. And we see this in animals. If a baby bird falls out of its nest, this emotional circuit gets activated, and the baby bird feels panic and it cries out. So the mother will come and pick the bird back up, comfort it, take care of the baby bird. The panic soothes. But again, if your parents are indoctrinated and getting poor information from the experts saying don't hold your baby when they cry, this panic never soothes, it never resolves. The purpose of this panic has never been um, comforted or soothed. So our baseline of panic is always present, and later in life, we always feel it. We call this anxiety, this impending doom, this sense that something is always going to go wrong or that we're always in danger, and it's not even about something that's happening. So that's from the trauma, the
Yeah.
depression. When the word depression itself means to bury something or to take something's energy away. So if I bury power lines, I've depressed them. Well, when somebody comes in and says they're feeling depressed, I want to figure out what that means. And what I often find is that they are burying something and that they don't have any energy because they're spending all of their energy burying this thing, kind of
Mhm.
like holding a beach ball underwater. What is it that they're burying? It's their emotions, it's their boundaries, it's their expression, it's their authenticity. So here's again the result of trauma. That's an adaptation to it. We talked about how the addictions become a response to the trauma as well. It's a distraction, a disconnection. It's a way of escaping from the present, from the pain. All of these things, whether it be the bipolar, the schizophrenia, things like schizophrenia, I gotta say, are very tenuously understood right now. What we often describe that as an inability to be present, an inability to discern what is real and what is happening right here and right now. So, what happens when you're a kid and you're going through pain chronically, habitually, and it's threatening? Well, can you set boundaries? Can you tell the people who are doing it to stop? No, of course not. That might make things more dangerous for you, and you might not even know that that's a possibility. And
Right.
even if you could do it, is the person who's hurting you really going to listen to this poor, defenseless child? So setting boundaries is out of the window. Can you go away physically? Can you leave that situation? No, because you're completely dependent on the relationship. So the third option, the survival mechanism, is you go away mentally. You
Mm.
disconnect from the present moment. So here, later in life, after we've spent a whole lifetime of disconnecting and trying to get away from this present moment, and our programming that developed in relationship to that pain was focused on getting away from the present moment, now we say we have schizophrenia. All of these can be traced back to traumatic events at some point in their lives, and every one of these conditions served a purpose. It helped us. It might have even saved our lives at some point. So
Right.
there's incredible wisdom here. These are wonderful friends to have with us, but they're danger prone. And things go terribly wrong when they're in charge. They served a purpose. They no longer help us. So we really want to connect with them, figure out why they're here, and meet those needs in different ways.
It's almost kind of like that movie. I know it's technically a comedy, but it's kind of like that movie, Me, Myself, and Irene. They took the approach to schizophrenia, and it was because he was burying trauma. It was because his wife
Exactly.
left him. And
Yeah.
which kind of brings me to a question since we're talking about diagnosis. We live in a world of very fast information. Just one Google click and it'll pull up whatever you type in, right? How dangerous do you feel self-diagnosing is?
Ah, well, first thing is great call on me, myself, and Irene. That's a fantastic example. You could see the wisdom out there of how it's been through the media of suppressing ourselves, the information of how this part of us develops as a protector, which was Hank in that
Right.
situation. He came out every time Charlie was in danger and he was ready to throw hands. So we all have these protectors, and it's born out of a defense mechanism. And when he was actually really able to connect with Hank and listen to him and say, let's talk about this. Why are you here? That's when they were able to build the relationship. And that's when Hank was no longer needed because Charlie was able to integrate all of the things that Hank would do. So fantastic messaging, I think. And yeah, it was pretty funny too. But in terms of self-diagnosing, I think this again comes back to the I have to do it alone. I have to
Hmm.
figure this out myself. This belief that I have to be strong, I have to have all the information. And One of the new things is we're hopping onto ChatGPT and using that as a therapist. And I won't lie, the way ChatGPT validates me and reaffirms me and encourages me in lots of ways can be very seductive. And there's a lot of therapists who do that as well, and that's how they make their living is they just keep validating the stories and the narratives and they keep encouraging you, and it might not actually help.
Mhm.
So I think that we need to be very careful in these spheres. And when I'm working with somebody and we're identifying all of the patterns and we're seeing how those adaptations, those patterns of adapting to the pain from the past keep showing up in the present, it's very sneaky. It's very elusive. It comes up and you won't even notice that it's here. It's like putting together a giant puzzle, but your face is 2, 3 inches above the puzzle. You can't see all the pieces. It's so important to have somebody there with you who can help you to find those things. So again, there's no harm in doing research and figuring out these things and listening to people like us talk or finding incredible teachers who talk about these things. Very good stuff. And you don't have to go in it alone.
Right. And so the reason I ask that is because within the last 5 years of therapy and just kind of learning more about myself and learning what I've went through, I've seen the word narcissist thrown out probably more times than I can count, and the word
Sure.
gaslighting, and a word that I learned probably like a couple years ago, love bombing. I didn't even know was a thing. Um, I feel like it
What
just
was that last one?
love bombing.
Love bombing. Okay.
Yeah. And it always feels to me like it's like almost devaluing those words because like my mom is 1000% a narcissist, right? And the gaslighting and everything else that she did throughout my life. And when I learned what those words meant and hearing my therapist say, yeah, that's exactly what she is and what she was doing. Um, and then just seeing across social media, I mean, you and I both know how insane social media is, right? And just seeing those words just casually being thrown around. I just feel like it does more harm than good, at least in my viewpoint, just because I feel it devalues what people have actually gone through.
Sure. Well, I think that there's actually a much larger issue that's happening in our culture right now, which is words are losing their meaning.
Yeah,
Words like fascism, Nazi, Hitler, racist, trauma, these are words that have very little meaning anymore. And then when the actual experience is there, we can't recognize it.
right.
So yeah, it's not so much about, you know, hearing the words and, hearing always people talk about it. Oh, I saw this movie and I'm traumatized now. It's more about, so we have these different levels of knowing things, and the very top is the conceptual, mental, and it's very superficial, skin deep. But we really want to be able to bring the knowledge of identifying these and experiencing it and knowing it deep inside of us of when we're being narcissistic or when we're being, I guess, if we're not aware of it, then we would be a toxic narcissist, right? Or knowing when somebody's gaslighting us or knowing when somebody's gaslighting each other, really being able to experience it and knowing it is very different from hearing it just being thrown around constantly. There is a devaluation of the words or the currency of the words in its sense. So it's very important right now.
And I'm really glad you shouted out everything else that social media is just loving to throw out there because I feel like every word that's thrown around nowadays is just like, do you even know what that word means? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Not to sidetrack too much there, but what is you emphasize self-inquiry and reflection in your work. How do these practices contribute to a long-term mental health and well-being?
So when we start taking that inventory of the pains, there's a few things that we want to identify. So we want to identify like the emotion that we're feeling, anger, fear, sadness, shame, disgust, or joy. And those emotions usually have some physiological or somatic correlation that comes along with it. So I might have a knot in my gut. I might have a constriction or a falling or a fluttering in my gut. My chest or my heart might be fluttering or throbbing, and there might be a heat or a weight that's associated with it. I might have a choking, dry sensation in my throat or a clenching in my jaw, or my muscles might be very, very tight and tense. These are very commonly correlated with very specific emotions. And then the third thing that is present is usually some belief about myself or the emotion itself. I'm bad because that emotion is bad and I'm feeling it, so it needs to go away. I don't like it. I want to get rid of it. What we want to do once we can identify that is we want to start to build a relationship with it. The easiest way that I know of to do that is to build a practice where we're going to intentionally turn our attention directly to that physiological feeling or that emotion and connect with it. So, what I say is, I'm going to sit on the floor where I'm at now on this cushion for 5 minutes, and I'm going to do this 3 times a day. That's 15 minutes out of the day. I spend way more time looking at silly videos on YouTube about protests and riots than I do sitting here turning my attention to myself. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make myself the priority. And I'm going to bring all of my awareness and I'm going to go and pay attention to this feeling. I'm not going to try and change it. I'm not going to fix it. I'm not going to get rid of it. I'm just going to connect with it. And I'm going to continue to increase the duration. So, how long I do it for. So, I start off with a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, whatever I can do. And I do that 3 times a day. And I'm going to increase the frequency. I'm going to do it 4 times, 5 times a day with the goal of always paying attention to these hot spots in my body. So when my stomach starts to clench, I know, oh, I'm scared. I'm perceiving a threat here. There's no threat here right now. You and I are just having a conversation, but my body is wired to respond to threats. And it also thinks that everything's a threat because when my body developed, it was in a state of always being in a threat. So when this gets activated, this threat response, I need to be able to comfort it in real time. And the way that I build to doing it in real time whenever it comes up is I do it when I'm sitting down right here practicing alone. So the more and more I can focus my attention on these things that are happening inside of me, the more I can recognize or identify it when it's present. The more I can identify it, the more I can engage and relate with it. And that's the way that we really connect with ourselves.
So there's two things that I wanted to actually bring up for myself when it comes to like emotion and like how we're trained to think that certain emotions are bad and they do those things to your body. So I had a really hard time actually crying for a long time. I would get tightness in my throat. It was almost kind of like somebody had their hand around my throat and I couldn't breathe.
Hmm.
And I would always stop myself from crying. And I think I want to say the last time I actually cried was when my brother was taken away from a drunk driver. And ever since then, I'll watch certain movies like have you ever heard of the movie The Invisible by chance?
Mm-mm.
So there's a scene of somebody overdosing in it, and it automatically triggers just like, wow, this is traumatic because I've attempted twice. Once at 14, once at 27. So just seeing somebody attempt, whether or not it's on a movie or not, it brings that tightness in my throat.
Hmm.
And I love the focusing on that emotion and that body part thing because I had a conversation with my therapist thinking there was something wrong with me that I couldn't cry. And another emotion that affects my body a lot is anxiety. I always get tightness in my stomach from
Yeah.
anxiety. I'll feel myself getting overwhelmed. I'll overheat or my stomach will get tight. I think it's really important when you're having anxiety, when you're on the verge of crying. I'm a firm believer in grounding yourself. That grounding technique of, the five steps of, or the five senses rather for
Yeah.
grounding. I think it helps me tremendously. And it's essentially what you're saying is focusing on that body part, focusing on that emotion, and getting in tune with what we're feeling and what uh, emotions your body is feeling.
Yeah. The grounding can be very useful in the beginning, especially when these emotions are overwhelming, where when we start to feel them, we get into this downward spiral and it's very dangerous. It's very interesting that you have this choking sensation feeling that's trying to keep down expression. And now you have a podcast called Voice for the Voiceless. And, you know, yeah, yeah. So what we want to try and do here is we want to, the grounding is a way to step away from the emotion and to regulate or stabilize it in a short period. But what we want to learn how to do over time is to build the capacity to relate with that emotion and to engage with it when it's here. So I'm sure at some point you probably learned in your life that expressing emotions was bad because you've already told me a little bit about your childhood and you told me about the mother that you were living with. And I'm sure that if you had expressed your emotions, whether it be sadness for the way that you're being treated or anger for the way that you're being treated, there would have been very bad consequences, which explains why there's such a threat response, why these emotions are so dangerous. So, what we want to try to do is really see those emotions. And one way that we can do this is we ask, when you start connecting with that throat feeling or that anxiety that you were noticing or the constriction in your gut, is we ask, well, how often do you feel it? Is it here now? Is it here every day? Is it here multiple times a day? Is it once a week? And then we ask, when did you first start feeling it? How far back does this go? And very frequently, that goes back to the early stages of your life, some of your first memories, most likely. And even when I'm working with people and they're finding it and they're like, oh, I'm 15 years old or I'm 20 years old, the feeling is already fully developed at that point. So the more comfortable we get with it, the earlier and earlier we go back in life. And then we ask, well, when I was going through that feeling, what were the circumstances? What was happening to me? And it's not so much about the things that were happening, but it was more about what did I need during that time? And very frequently the answers are very similar of what I needed when I was going through that. These emotions are here for a reason. I was feeling pain at that point for a reason. And what I needed was to be heard, to be seen. So I needed somebody to be there. I needed somebody to see me, hear me, and understand what I'm going through. And then to accept that and say, yeah, Chris, of course you're sad. Of course you're angry. These are very painful things that are happening to you. And every sign in your body is saying these are bad things, and you have boundaries that you're trying to express. That's normal. Of course you're doing that. You need these things to survive. They're there to help you. And then they might even offer you some comfort to reaffirm and to strengthen the connection and to say, Chris, you're not going to lose your relationships because you feel this way. In fact, the way that you feel will strengthen your relationships. I'm so glad that you shared this with me. There will be some physical comfort. And then it might be, and this is how you can express your emotions. There's some teaching of how do you let these emotions come out in structured, constructive ways. This is how you let me know this that you're feeling this, and this is how you ask for the things that you need. And of course, we would have to do this consistently.
Right.
So, if those are the needs that we have when we feel these things, your job now is to notice when you're feeling that, to see the little kid version of yourself that's in those feelings. And then you've got to be the person to give yourself all those things that you needed that you didn't get.
Right.
So every time those feelings and those emotions come up, it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with it. And it might be very challenging to express things physiologically, especially like crying. I struggle with it too. I rarely can cry. Things have to be very intense, as you mentioned, for that to
Yeah.
happen. But we can notice that choking feeling where we're trying to hold down the emotion, and we can comfort that and say, you don't have to do that anymore. It's like Hank who's trying to protect us. At ease, buddy. You can rest. You don't have to work so hard to protect me. We can do this together.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. Really big believer in inner child work because I feel if we can honor that inner child in all of us and be that person that kid needed when we were younger, I think it's the most important part of healing because it's gotten me so far. I remember when I shaved my beard a couple months ago, and it was the first time since like 2018, after my second attempt. I told my therapist, I said, so I never told anybody this, but I don't even think I've said it on a podcast yet. I shaved my beard because I wanted to see that person that I saw before I grew this out. It was a security blanket. The beard was a security blanket for me. I didn't want to see that bare face of myself. I didn't want to see the face that I saw before I attempted a second time, and when I started growing out the beard, it's like, oh yeah, it's reinventing the wheel, as you said earlier, just reinventing my look and forgetting that person that I was in 2018, 2017. But that's, whether I was 27 or not, that's still an older version of myself that was still bleeding, that was still hurt, that
Yeah.
wasn't healing at all. And I never acknowledged how much pain that kid was in.
Yeah. Yeah, so what you're saying is this was a way to disconnect from yourself or to bury or exile a part of yourself. And so here we could ask the same question is that the first time that you've ever felt exiled or buried or disconnected? Like somebody was pushing you away or saying that you weren't good enough the way you are and they don't want you? Is that the first time that you've ever felt that in your life?
So the first time I ever felt it was, I believe, when I was 14. That
Hmm.
was my first attempt in high school.
Yeah.
And that was like a whole 6 month span of my mom just completely trying to forget that I exist.
Yeah. And how did that make you feel?
Horrible. Um,
Terrible.
I remember after the attempt, she sent me away for like 6 months, exiling me, right?
Hmm.
To a family friend, didn't check up on me or nothing, and said, I don't want to put up with you anymore.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
that's what I remember her for, just being that, not wanting to show compassion or love or anything like that, because that's just who
Hmm.
she was as a person. Um,
Yeah.
but
Now,
it's always interesting when people bury certain parts of themselves and not realize that that part of themselves needs to heal still too,
that's
right?
right. Yeah. And now I say this because we're in this healing journey right now. And I'm not saying this as criticism or judgment, but because you're looking at this and this is something that we can see is that pattern of exiling, of neglect, of burying, that pattern that your mom did that hurt you so much is also inside of you. And you treat yourself in that same way sometimes. It's a way of continuing the same pain that you felt originally.
Hmm.
So that's a pattern that we want to become very aware of. And we want to notice when we're exiling, when we're disconnecting from ourselves, or when we're pushing ourselves away and saying, you're not good enough that way. And we want to create something new. So those are wonderful opportunities to really reconnect with yourself and to create something new. And further, we want to be very careful of the blame here because it's very easy to blame that pain on your mother too,
Right.
rightfully so. And, how painful is it to disconnect from your child? And where did she learn that from? Somebody probably did that exact same thing to her, and she might even mistake
Yep.
that pattern for compassion or connection. She might be saying something along the lines of, I have to send Chris away in order for him to recover or to heal on his own because I'm hurting him or whatever. In other words, she learned that disconnection, exiling is compassion.
Right.
So she's carrying that same pain around too. Oh, how
Hmm.
sad, how painful.
Right. Yeah, and I think the most important part of this journey was breaking that cycle. It was
Yeah.
breaking that, exiling myself. And when I started therapy, when I started taking care of myself and uh not using distractions anymore, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's was the biggest thing for me. I was gonna mention this earlier when we talked about the movie, but I think it's best to bring it up now. Movies for me was my way of getting away from everything. It was
Absolutely.
literally my safe spot.
Yeah.
And When I tell you I live in movie quotes,
Hmm.
every sentence I can hear little sounds and it makes me think of a movie. Like my brain is crazy with movie quotes, and I realize why I do it because it's
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, I'm loving this conversation, but it also allows me to bring in something I saw when I was 12 years old or something I saw when I was 30 years old and
Yeah.
make it a fun conversation. I love that the me, myself, and Irene thing went so well because that was the immediately my first go-to.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you, Chris. My girlfriend often says that I speak in TV quotes too, or movie quotes, and she always says he was raised by the TV. And, and it's an
Yeah.
interesting dynamic that we have because she wasn't allowed to have a TV in her house until, she was moved out of the house as an adult, and she still don't have a TV. So I show her all the movies and all the anime and
Hell
everything.
yeah.
So she sees, she's like, "Oh, that's where you learned that
I
from."
love it.
Yeah. Yeah, that was our safe haven, our safe escape. And there's still, I know for myself, there's still so many ways that I disconnect and distract. It's
Yeah.
really like I'm a part-time practicer in this sense. I still go on YouTube. I still look at silly things. I still spend a lot of time on the internet. When I start feeling emotions, I notice that my phone just kind of levitates over to my face and then it's just stuck on me.
Right.
But then we can notice it and make choices and say, oh, I was feeling some pain. There was something that was present in that pattern of disconnection and escaping to somewhere safe kicked in, and we can choose to do something else, like have this conversation together.
Absolutely. Do you have any upcoming projects or initiatives you're excited about focusing on mental health or healing?
Well, right now, what I'm really focusing on is sharing these messages and having these conversations. Just getting to the point a couple months ago where I could start doing podcasts was a big step for me because, well, if I would have put myself out when I was a kid and made myself seen, I would have been in direct threat and my survival would have been in jeopardy. So this was an excellent opportunity for me to comfort that and to share the messages because I always have people telling me you should share these messages. So that's what I'm focusing on right now for the next couple months is really making a lot of time to have these conversations and put some information out there for people. The other thing is I'm always working with people as well. So those are the two things I'm really focusing on right now is my ability to work with people and my ability to make these messages more available.
Right. So other than podcasts, how do you share your platform? Like, do you go to like do any conferences or anything like that, or speak at any clinics or schools or anything like that?
Occasionally, I'll do some workshops, but mostly I post things digitally. So I'll write little articles or I'll do small videos like this, where I'll just have a clip of me sharing a piece of information and post it on social media or something.
Great. So before we end the podcast here, I usually ask every guest this, and actually looking forward to your answer because I think this conversation has been great. If you could change one thing in the mental health community, what would it be?
So I think that a lot of the times we have this idea that the answers are outside of us. Just trust the experts, we're told time and time again, and over and over. We find that these systems and these structures do not have our best interest at heart. When we're talking about a for-profit industry, the bottom line is always profit. And the dynamics of health, healing, ethics, integrity, they might be in the equation, but they always are trumped by profits. So if we could remove one thing, it would be probably the profit. But what I would really focus on personally is the idea that the answers are outside of you. I would really like people to have some belief that the wisdom, the information, the knowledge, the wholeness is all inside of each and every one of us. And we can get teachers and guides to help us reconnect with that. But the answer is not in an expert or in a guru, in a sage or a shaman. The answer is inside of you.
I love that, and I'm a firm believer in that as well. I think your gut feeling is almost always spot on. So I couldn't agree with that more. So before we close out today's podcast with our quote, where can our listeners find you?
My website is the best spot, or the Instagram that we have is a good spot as well if you want to follow, um, daily things that we're working on because we have other projects and things like that. But website will have articles and it has a contact form and a therapy request option as well.
Perfect. So before I read my quote, did you have any closing words for the listeners or a quote of your own?
Go ahead. I'll do mine after you if you want.
Perfect. So this one doesn't have an official author on it. It is from To You From Me. In a world that often expects men to be strong and silent, your willingness to speak up about your mental health challenges in an act of bravery and self-care.
Beautiful. Yeah, so there's a quote that I often share, which is by a teacher of mine, and he says that we're not responsible for the things that happened, for the things that shaped us, for the things that shaped our emotions, the way that we process our emotions, the way that we perceive the world or ourselves. We're not responsible for all the things that happened to us, but we are responsible for what we do with that pain that we carry around. So this is a great opportunity to take accountability, to cultivate agency, choice, and take responsibility for ourselves.
Love it. Very powerful. I think the cards are going to fall where they lay, right? It's we can't control the uncontrollable, only how we react to it, only how we take care of ourselves in whatever circumstance we're thrown in. So I definitely agree with that message. Before we close out, Julian, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. This has been one of the more personal podcasts that I've had in a while, and I think having these kind of conversations is really important and definitely powerful. So thank you so much for bringing your platform onto mine.
Yeah, couldn't have done it without you, Chris. Thank you.
Of course. And for all my listeners, thank you guys so much for your support as always. Till next time, much love and be gentle with yourselves. Take care, guys.